Hello everyone, present day Aries here, and I'm just here to throw in a little disclaimer that the video you're about to watch was recorded back in 2023. So please take baby Aries' word with a grain of salt. Oh, and if my voice sounds raspy in this video, I was practicing vocal exercises at the time, so please be mindful of that. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy. Hello everyone, Aries Rainy Days here, and welcome back to Rainy Day Creations. This video is going to be somewhat of a follow-up about 3 of my characters featured in my previous speed paint. Those being Opalescence Glassheart, Sans ST Seraph, and JD respectively. So, without further ado, feel free to sit back, relax, grab a few snacks, and join me for another rainy day. First things first, one thing that you're probably going to notice is that this is the first speed paint where I actually try to incorporate a proper background in, alongside the base sketch of my characters. Since I made this piece for a server event, I really wanted to push myself to make sure my characters blended in as much with the background I'd be putting them in as possible. And I'll have to admit, it was pretty tricky, given that I usually save the background for last, which honestly is a bad habit that I developed as I improved at my character designs. I don't know why, but 99% of the time, I just flat out don't think about what kind of background I'm gonna throw my characters into, and tend to just wing it, which has made some rather interesting results in the past. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to kick this habit as I gain more experience. Moving on from that, I'd like to set the scene. The first summer after the barrier shattered, Opal, ST, and JD decided to take a day trip to Ebot City and visit one of the beaches. While ST and Opal are content with just sitting by the water's edge chatting, JD decides to enjoy the day to the fullest in the most mid-chaotic way they possibly can. This'll make sense further down the line, or maybe it won't. Their antics barely make sense to me anymore, and I'm the one that created them. Now, between the 3 of these guys, ST's the only one that's actually half decent at swimming, whereas JD sinks like a stone in deep enough water, and Opal is a ghost. I don't know about you, but ghosts don't exactly need to swim. As for why JD sinks like a stone, it's because their body by default is more dense than water, due to their metallic parts. On one hand, they won't easily get swept away by an unexpected current if they jumped into a river or something. On the other hand, they can't exactly swim to the surface, so if they end up way over their head in a lake or something, they'll have to find somewhere with stable enough ground to be able to climb up out of the water. Thankfully, that isn't the case in this piece, as they're safely standing beyond the shoreline after having caught a fish in their mouth. I'll leave how they actually got it to your guys' imagination. On a separate but slightly related note, Opal is extremely sensitive to sunlight thanks to her gargoyle DNA, so to speak. It's not vampire levels of sensitivity where she'll croak if she stays out in direct sunlight for too long, but she tends to grow incredibly lethargic and will shed a ton of dust before her body proceeds to harden into an ectoplasmic gelatin sort of substance. All of which to say, an umbrella is a must-have accessory for each and every day trip onto the surface, preferably held by someone she can trust won't drop it, or let it go as a joke. Hence why ST sticks by her side, rather than hopping into the water himself with his sibling. Which brings me back somewhat to my previous point. Remember how I said that ST is a half-decent swimmer? While he's definitely had a handful of lessons in the past alongside his brother Galahad, he is extremely light, weighing around 23 pounds, and is extremely prone to getting swept away or underwater by a particularly strong current. This alone is a big reason why he typically opts to stay away from the Azure Vales, because one second he could just be chilling casually and admiring the scenery of the stones, and the next he'll end up getting shoved into the river and swept away to the Midnight Caverns, after falling down a handful of waterfalls. And that's assuming he doesn't just end up falling into the dump and getting covered in a shitload of algae. which I guess you could say that type of experience would be an all-around bad time. But another reason he tends to avoid swimming is because he's extremely self-conscious about his ribcage. This is because it's covered in many scars, the majority of which were inflicted by his gaster, while the rest were inflicted by other Hexeri or refugees that decided to pick a fight with him. While he could probably get away with just wearing a t-shirt, the very thought of having his ribs exposed to anybody is absolutely terrifying to him. In fact, the only ones that really know about his scars, outside of his father Grilby, is JD and Opal, both of whom have had to tend to his wounds on multiple occasions after any fights that he'd got into. On top of this, he also tends to keep his right hand wrapped in gauze to cover up his hand plate when he isn't wearing his work gloves. On the upside, at least he won't have to worry about sand getting stuck between his metal carpals. Now, a final note before I start touching on different techniques I used in the coloring and shading of this piece. Opal and JD are both at opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to dealing with ST's antics. Opal is kind of the mom friend who works to de-escalate and evaluate a situation at face value, while JD is more likely to just kick someone in the teeth and given a reason. Despite this contrast in personality, they tend to get along fairly well, with JD more often than not looking for guidance from Opal about how to handle a situation more gracefully than just running away or absolutely obliterating somebody's teeth bones. Opal, on the other hand, enjoys just watching JD's antics from the sidelines, albeit at a distance and always prepared to stop them from doing something completely stupid, if she's aware of it. Like, I'm sure she'd risk her life just to stop JD from finding a shark in the ocean over a fish, but that's just me. Now on to the fun technical stuff that went into making this piece. For starters, I decided to change the color of my canvas to more of an off-white / light gray color to hopefully not only make it easier to catch any coloring / blending mistakes I'm 100% going to make as I work, but to also make life easier when it comes to picking colors for bone tones and bright clothing colors. I also made sure to separate my background colors from the character colors as I worked, because there was going to be a lot of blending involved when it came to the sky and the water. Between the sand, sky, and ocean, the sand ironically ended up being the easiest to color since all I'd ultimately need to add over top of it was a kind of grainy texture. The water was slightly trickier, but not impossible to handle once I got the right tone. The sky, on the other hand, that's kind of the weakest part of this piece in my opinion, purely from lack of practice, as I feel like I might not have alternated enough between different colors to give it a more realistic feel, so to speak. Granted, this is also likely because I very rarely ever draw characters outside in the daytime. Thankfully, everything else ended up being somewhat of a no-brainer for me. Since I wanted everything to maintain an overall upbeat vibe, I stuck with a brighter palette, but was careful to not make my colors look too washed out or too eye-bleedy, if that makes any sense. I feel like this piece was also the first one I've made in a while where I could actually have a ton of fun with various different patterns and gradients. Just generally toying around with new brushes to find a thing that I liked. Also, as a tip for any artists out there that want to have a ghost-like character in any of your pieces, I strongly recommend keeping all of that character's layers in a group separate from the rest of your work, and decreasing the opacity as needed. I started doing this whenever I incorporate Opal into any of my artwork, and holy hell, it is a freaking lifesaver. Another tip I can't recommend enough is utilizing clipping masks to try and color over your line art. Not only does it soften the overall appearance of your lines, but it can also help in adding additional textures to things like water. Another thing that I was experimenting with in this piece was my shading. Specifically how light is supposed to hit an object, because that's not something I experiment enough with. While I'm not completely certain I got it 100% right, especially with JD in the background looking a bit out of place still, I'm still ecstatic about how ST and the umbrella came out. Per usual, I also utilized a multiply layer over areas that had texture with an obvious gradient, as to not wash out all of the colors. Another thing that I actually tried experimenting with was creating an addition layer for some of my highlights, mainly on the umbrella and the phone screen since both were reflective surfaces. For extra clarity on how to utilize the multiply layer in spots with a texture or gradient, what you want to do is sample a color between the gradient you've created and simply color over the necessary spots. By default, the layer will add more of a pop and a soft light shadow effect to the objects in question. You can see with ST's shadow on the sand, the beach bag, ST's shorts, etc. So don't worry about trying to darken the color for any reason. The layer should just do all the work for you. That all being said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with utilizing a normal layer, or the default layer type your art program will make, for shading. After all, that's effectively what I did with Opal here between her hair, skin, and bathing suit, despite the fact that she is made out of stone. I just recommend the multiply layer method in cases where you may end up losing parts of your texture while you're shading. That all being said, I think it's about time for me to wrap things up for now. For those of you who stuck around this long in the video, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking so much time out of your busy schedules to listen to all of my ramblings. I had a lot of fun working on this piece, and hopefully I'll be able to provide you guys with more tips about how I accomplish some of the things that I do while creating each of these pieces. And if you guys have any additional questions about my techniques, or any of my characters, feel free to ask a question in the comment section below, where I'll be happy to answer them. In the meantime, feel free to check out one of my other videos and let me know who you guys would like for me to discuss in the future. As far as my next video goes, I'm more than likely going to make another redraw of my old art, so please keep an eye out for that if you're interested. With all of that out of the way, I hope your pillows are all pleasantly chilled tonight and that I'll be able to catch you all on another rainy day. Bye.